Hello everyone, this is Here's Trivia, and today we're going to be ranking the 30 unique character traits in Romance of Three Kingdoms 8 Remake. As there are exactly 1,000 playable characters in the game, and only 30 with unique traits, obviously none of them are going to be F tier. So for the purpose of this tier list here, there will be just S, A, B, and C tiers. Now, this video will be the first of many upcoming tier lists and guides for the game, and they take a long time to research and make, so before we dive into the thick of things, I would appreciate it if you take just a quick moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on any future content, and comment down below your favorite unique trait in the game. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to start at the bottom of tier C, where we have a pair of traits that grant terrain movement bonuses, with Deng Ai's Mountain Raid and Guojia's Quick Footed. One increases ally movement in mountainous terrain, and one increases ally movement on open plain. Both are historical nods, with Deng Ai's famous hike through the Yinping Mountains during the conquest of Shuhan, and Guojia's blitz through Cao Cao's northern campaign against Yuan Shang and Yuan Xi. But despite their successes historically, both of these traits are actually quite weak in the game, as the slight movement bonus range in a turn-based battle setting offers very few advantages. Additionally, Deng Ai and Guojia must either be in the commander or staff officer position for these trait bonuses to activate. Next up, also in the C tier, we have another trait that takes inspiration from a historical event with Lu Meng's Attentive, which grant Lu Meng an extra boost of trust through interactions when Lu Meng's intelligence stat is above 80 points. The amount of trust boosted will scale positively with Lu Meng's cultural reputation. Now, if all of this sounds a bit confusing, let me first share the historical inspiration behind this trait. Historically, Lu Meng grew up in the army camps and never took much of an interest in reading. But early on in his career, Sun Quan approached him and told him that reading will help make him a better general, and when Lu Meng complained that he did not have the time, Sun Quan used himself as an example, citing that he is a much busier man than Lu Meng, yet he still finds the time to read and learn. Taking Sun Quan's suggestion to heart, Lu Meng eventually became a self-taught scholar that few people knew about, until one day when Lu Su passed by Lu Meng's army camp and stopped for a chat. At the time, Lu Su still had the impression of Lu Meng being an uneducated military brat, but after their brief meeting, Lu Su became incredibly impressed with how much wiser Lu Meng had become, as he would go on to recommend Lu Meng to Sun Quan as his eventual successor. So basically in the game, once you raise Lu Meng's intelligence to above 80 points, from his starting value of 49, every interaction that you initiate, whether it's through a discussion, gift, practice duel, or debate, you will gain additional bonus amount of trust with your target officer, with that exact amount directly correlated to your current cultural reputation. So in short, your action points will become more efficient, and you will gain wisdom points faster through maxing out the trust meter faster. The drawback here is that raising intelligence from 49 to 80 is quite the difficult task that can be made slightly easier if you can trigger a historical tale in the game that will have Sun Quan help raise your intelligence stat. However, this tale does require that Sun Quan is the faction leader and that both Lu Meng and Jiang Qin are working for him. Lastly, this trait is only useful when the player is playing Lu Meng, and it will fall off eventually as you max out your tactics and skills, as wisdom points will become meaningless for you at that point. So for all those reasons, while this trait is designed perfectly to reflect Lu Meng's historical background, it just isn't that strong in the game, so it sits rightfully in tier C. Continuing with trust-building traits, we have Liu Bei's Great Virtue next, which guarantees a meeting will always be successful, except when the target is hostile, antagonistic, or sworn enemies with Liu Bei already. This trait is honestly worthless, as if you have even just one synergetic officer in the same city, he or she can easily vouch for you to guarantee the same successful meeting under the same conditions, so this is definitely a C tier trait. Moving on, we have Diao Chen's Enchanting trait, which is the final trust-building trait in the game, and it automatically increases the trust level of all target male officers to trusting when they meet Diao Chen for the first time, unless their personality is selfless. Basically, this is just a nice initial trust boost that can be best utilized for free officer recruitment for players who are playing as Diaochan. Now, aside from movement bonuses and relationship bonuses, there is another class of trait bonuses that I deem as C tier, and they are the management bonuses. Starting with the worst one, we have Dongzhuo's Treacherous, which increases troop and gold gains in the region that Dongzhuo is governor of at the cost of public order. Now, first off, this is a passive bonus. Aside from having Dongzhuo as a governor, there are no other trigger conditions for this trait bonus, so it can be activated whether the player is playing as Dongzhuo, which makes you the governor of every region that you sit in, or simply have Dongzhuo as a governor assigned in any of the regions aside from the one that you're in for players who are not playing as Dongzhuo. In either case, the amount of extra troops and gold gain will scale directly with Dongzhuo's notoriety reputation at the time. So basically, unless you're playing as Dongzhuo, this amount will be very little because AI controlled Dongzhuo will gain notoriety very, very slowly. Furthermore, there is a slight drawback to this bonus as the region will also be losing a bit of public order. This forces the player to commit one of their 10 officers per parliament session to boosting public order, or eventually face a public unrest situation. Either way, the amount gained here is not significant enough for this to be a strong bonus, which is why I rank it in tier C. Likewise, Sun Jian also has a similar bonus with his Jiangdong Tigers trait, which gives an increase of troops after every successful offensive battle that Sun Jian commands. The number of troops that you will get will scale directly with Sun Jian's martial reputation. Here, this bonus is basically worth around one usage of a level 1 cure tactic, as it basically gives you a few thousand extra troops after every offensive victory to help replenish any losses. It just isn't strong enough to warrant any rank aside tier C. Now, as a slightly stronger version of Sun Jian's trait is Yuan Shao's illustrious trait, which allows for conscription to be used without the public order penalty. It also increases the amount of troops that you can usually conscript based on Yuan Shao's current reputation, depending on whichever one's higher. So not only can you use conscription more consistently, the amount of troop gain here is also much higher than the amount gained from the Jiangdong Tiger trait bonus. So overall, this is going to be a slightly better trait, but it's also going to cost you one strategic point, whether you use it for conscription or for march in the case of Sun Jian having to attack offensively, and both will just be tier C traits. Last but not least in tier C, we have Xun Yu and his royal assistance trait, which basically provides Dongzhuo's trait bonus without any of the downsides such as public order loss. Additionally, Xun Yu can provide these bonuses while serving as the tactician, which is a role that he already thrives in given his high intelligence stat. But once again, I don't consider any of these troops or gold gain trait bonuses to be that strong. So like the rest of them, this is just going to be a tier C trait. Now, moving into the B tier, we start with a trait that I'm super torn on, and it's Jiaxu's Censure, which increases the effect of Estrange, but more importantly, has a chance to lower the loyalty of other officers when the Estrange command is successful. So not only do you get a free upgrade to the Estrange effect level, you also get a chance to get a small splash effect onto the other officers in the same city. And this effect can be used whether you're playing as Jiaxu or just simply have him as one of your officers. And the only downside is that this effect can only be used once per parliament session. So on one hand, lowering loyalties and flipping officers or even potentially governors are a huge aspect of the game. The chance to only do this once per parliament session at the cost of the one strategic point with Jiaxu greatly limit how impactful it is. So at the end of the day, I'm just going to put this trait as just B tier. Now, the rest of the B tier are going to consist of 8 officers whose traits provide some sort of combat boost. And starting with the most unique one, we have Zhao Yun, whose trait Fearless will negate all plot tactics and ignore zone of control when Zhao Yun's own morale is above 70. Essentially, this allows Zhao Yun to move wherever he likes on the battlefield, especially in conjunction with his marching skill, while ignoring any of the terrain related plot tactic attacks that the enemy can throw your way. It is a very unique trait bonus and reflects Zhao Yun's performance during the Battle of Changbanpo. But all things considered, the movement itself is not super strong, but the ability to immune oneself from all plot tactics is definitely worthy of the B tier. Another slightly unique trait is Zhao Yun's Adamantine, which increases his defense by 100 points when his morale is above 70. While this trait is easily counterable with Instigate or other morale lowering mechanics, the 100 point of extra defense is definitely helpful, especially if you could give Zhao Yun elite infantry to farther boost him to become one of the tankiest unit in the game. But given its morale limitations and the fact that defense alone cannot win you any battles, this trait is just B tier. Similar to Zhao Yun's trait, which has a requirement of 70 morale, our next trait, Old and Strong, belonging to Huang Zhong, also requires a minimum of 70 morale to activate, but in addition to that, Huang Zhong must also be at least 60 years old, which happens after the year 207. And once these two requirements are satisfied, Huang Zhong's archery tactics will get a 70-point attack boost, and for reference, without farther development and better unit upgrades, Huang Zhong by default will start with 219 attack with a full unit of basic archers, so a 70-point attack boost is going to be significant, especially given that Huang Zhong starts with every single archery tactic, including the ultimate tactic in Rain of Arrows. The morale drawback here is actually less of a concern, as without 70 morale, you're not going to be able to use any of the archery tactics in the first place. Therefore, this bonus is going to activate every time you use an archery tactic, as they're the requirement for both. Overall, this is a solid trait bonus geared perfectly for a character who specializes in archery tactic. The downside of waiting until Huang Zhong is 60 in 207 for those playing an earlier start date cannot be worked around, but at least the good news here is that Huang Zhong's historical death date in the game is 222, so you'll have him around for plenty of time after he becomes 60. Continuing to another one of the 5 Tiger Generals, we have Ma Chao and his Fine Rider trait, which increases the attack of cavalry tactics by 100 when Ma Chao's morale is above 100. So in this case, the morale restriction is much higher, but essentially this trait bonus is designed to ensure that Ma Chao will do massive damage with his Whirlwind tactic. Aside from the strictest level of morale restriction, this is a solid trait bonus and also deserving of the B tier. Similar to Ma Chao, Zhou Yu and his Fire God trait also has the same restriction of 100 points of morale, but instead of boosting cavalry tactic attack by 100 points, it boosts fire-related tactics by 120 points. So in Zhou Yu's case, this is going to be his level 3 Raging Fire tactic in plots, level 3 fire arrows in archers, and his 2 ship tactics in his level 3 incendiary and level 2 ultimate bombardment. Now for the most part, naval battles are a rarity in the game, even when you take consideration of some of the river maps down south. So that's going to limit the number of tactics that actually applies this bonus on top of the high morale restriction. But should you be able to pull it off, even after the nerfs to fire damage in the first patch, Zhou Yu's trait is still pretty good as long as you can maintain the morale. And speaking of the Kingdom of Wu and fire attacks, Lu Xun and his Cold Flame trait will also land in tier B alongside Zhou Yu. In Lu Xun's case, he will gain 100 attack to fire-related tactics when targeting enemy generals with above 70 morale. This one's a bit weird compared to the ones before, because here you cannot really control the enemy morale. But in essence, the idea behind this is to do more damage to enemies' best units, and hope that the fire will also reduce their morale at the start of their next turn. On higher difficulty, this is going to be easier to pull off, as the AI will get more morale at the start of battle, and also gain morale faster throughout battle as well. So overall, I would say that Lu Xun's trait is actually easier to pull off than Zhou Yu's trait, which is why it also provides less attack boosts. Staying here with Wu characters, we have Sun Ce next with his Overlord trait, And this trait will increase the attack of Sun Ce's infantry, cavalry, and archery tactic by 85 points as long as the target he's hitting has 85 attack or higher. Now, this condition is interesting because there are only 54 officers out of the 1,000 in the game that satisfy this condition, and one of the 54 is Sun Ce himself. Fortunately, there are specialty items, character growth, and more importantly, deputies that can boost the attack value of generals on the battlefield. So while this is not going to be the most consistent trigger, it's definitely better than it looks, and it's going to be great against the most difficult targets on the battlefield. Additionally, there are a lot of flexibility with this trait, as it can be good for any of the 3 unit types, which might not mean much for Sun Ce himself, who is most likely going to specialize in infantry, given his starting tactics. But all unique trait has a chance to be passed down to kids, so by covering all 3 unit type, this will also allow greater flexibility for Sun Ce's kids who are lucky enough to inherit this trait. Now, the last trait in Tier B will be Zhang Fei and his villain trait, which grants a direct 100 attack boost as long as you are outnumbered by enemy troops. First off, 100 attack is a significant boost, and it's not restricted to any tactics, which means even basic attacks will get this bonus. This is something that trumps all of the other attack boosting trait that we have seen so far. Additionally, troop count is firmly under your own control, so you can definitely manipulate it to always have this triggered. The only issue here is in the late game, when you have to balance the trade-off between having a clear and massive troop count advantage across all your generals, or deliberately handicapping your entire army just so that Zhang Fei can hit like a truck. In most cases, I would say that you would just stop utilizing this trait once you have established yourself after the early game, where this trait is going to shine. The one caveat here is that I believe this trait enables for a great Zhang Fei Vagrant Army playstyle, especially one where you can pass this on to some of your generically generated children, so that more of your officers can have this bonus in a disadvantaged battle. Now, moving up to Tier A, we start with the best attack boosting trait in Lü Bu's Unmatched, which not only boosts the attacks of all infantry, cavalry, and archery tactics by 120 points with no morale requirements, Lü Bu will also gain 5 points of morale passively each day. So clearly, this is leaps and bounds better than the previous 6 attack boosting traits, as not only are there no conditions for activation, you also get a persistent passive morale boost along with it, and this is why Lü Bu's Unmatched is going to be in the A tier. And speaking of traits that can boost morale, the next trait in this tier will be Xia Houdun's Dauntless, which increases the morale of nearby allies by 5 points every day when Xia Houdun's morale is above 70 himself. So the idea here is to have someone inspire Xia Houdun's morale first to get it to at least 70, at which point you can put 6 characters to huddle up around Xia Houdun to gain the passive morale boost before heading out to engage the enemy, as you must be directly adjacent to Xia Houdun to get this bonus effect. Despite this is still a great trait, as it allows for a reliable strategy to boost key characters with certain morale requirements, whether to activate their traits or enable strong tactics. And for those reasons, Xia Houdun's Dauntless is definitely worthy of the A tier. Given that we have established how useful morale is, let's look at our next trait in Gunning and his Bell, which lowers the morale of nearby enemy units by 20 after defeating an enemy unit. So how this works is that if Gunning knocks out an enemy unit in battle, any enemy units currently adjacent to the defeated enemy will lose 20 points of morale. This effect can occur multiple times, even in the same turn, if Gunning can use an AoE tactic or a stratagem to knock out multiple foes. While the 20-point morale debuff is incredibly powerful, the adjacency requirements and the turn timing with Gunning in particular is going to make this rather unreliable and mostly out of the player's control. So A tier is the highest I'm going to go for this ability. Moving on, we have Guan Yu, the last of the 5 Tiger Generals, with his Chivalrous Spirit trait, which simply increases the link damage in battle. This is applied to both when Guan Yu triggers the link damage himself or is part of a link boost for another general, and given his initial starting relationship to Liu Bei and Zhang Fei, this trait is always going to be good. It will be stronger when the player plays Guan Yu because you can build and gain a lot more link synergies, but at the very least, Guan Yu can be a sizable damage boost for your character in all your battles. Similar to Guan Yu, Sun Quan and his indispensable trait also uses link effects, but instead of focusing on damage boosts in battle, Sun Quan's bonus is for all the other link interactions in the game. Now, there are just way too many instances for us to cover, but essentially this includes all your price reduction triggers at the market, slander triggers, inquire triggers for gold, public attitude, and much, much more. So holistically speaking, Sun Quan's trait is probably better than Guan Yu's trait, as it will be more useful in more instances throughout the game, but it is only useful if you're playing as Sun Quan, which is a considerable restriction. So at the end of the day, this is just going to be A tier. Continuing on, we have Cao Cao's great hero trait, which first gives him 1 additional strategic point, which might not sound like much, but over the course of a campaign, these extra parliament actions will add up. Furthermore, Cao Cao himself is the only character in the game that can be used twice in any parliament session. This allows for many useful combinations such as estrange into recruit, or recruit into march, or destroy into march, or any combination of parliament actions you can think of utilizing Cao Cao's amazing stats and skills. While this is quite strong, I just don't think it's game-changing strong. So it's just going to be A tier. Now, the final A tier trait that we have, and definitely the strongest A tier trait, will be Jiang Wei and his prodigy trait, which will make his tactics reusable one more time after day 10. This means your tactics will be reset on the 10th day, regardless of their current usage. So make sure to use them early because you cannot save them for double use after day 10, as they reset, not give you one more. Now, if you look at Jiang Wei's tactic, this is definitely not that strong on himself, but if you can make him a deputy for one of your best generals, or perhaps whoever you're playing as in a given campaign, then Jiang Wei basically grants you double usage of all your tactics in your battles, which makes him incredibly powerful and borderline S tier. But I ended up keeping him in A tier just because this trait is reliant on you having a strong character to pair with him, and the fact that he's only available starting with the 226 start date, which is when most of the more powerful characters have already died or are close to dying, while the later period generals are all relatively weaker in comparison. And with that, we're finally in S tier, as I have Pang Tong and his young Phoenix rank 5th in the game. This trait will fill 50 points or half of your stratagem gauge at the start of battle, and is a game changer, as it will essentially guarantee you first use and sometimes even a second use of your stratagem before your enemy can even use their first one. Oftentimes, if you focus fire down the enemy commander, you can completely shut down their stratagem usage for the battle just off of your first mover advantage due to this trait. And for those reasons, Pang Tong's young Phoenix is S tier. Also, as a side note, if you're playing as Pang Tong and is able to make a child who inherit this ability, you can double up and start the battle with a full stratagem bar. But even better than Pang Tong's young Phoenix at our 4th place in our tier list is Lu Su and his far-sighted trait, which allows for a free transfer and allocate actions during Parliament, as long as Lu Su is the governor or tactician. While this sounds like nothing, it is incredibly powerful, as you can essentially always have the optimum officer placement on your map, whether you want to focus your best characters to attack on different fronts, or simply want to move some extra characters to your interior regions to help with their development. Lu Su will be there for you. And the best thing is, tactician appointments cost nothing and can be done and undone on the fly to ensure farsighted to be triggered at all times. And it is one of those few traits that really shines even when you're not playing as the character, and for this reason, Lu Su should be really high on your list of always recruit in every campaign. And to beat that and ranking in at number 3 on our tier list is going to be Zhang Liao and his Liao Arrives trait. Similar to Gunning's Bell, Liao Arrives is a morale lowering trait that activates whenever Zhang Liao defeats an enemy unit. Liao Arrives only lowers the enemy morale by 10 points, but there are no adjacency requirements. So basically, for every enemy that Zhang Liao defeats in person, every single enemy on the map, regardless if you have vision of them, will lose 10 points of morale. This is an incredibly powerful and borderline unfair bonus that can help you win many battles with ease when utilized correctly, not to mention the potential for stacking this trait with your child's should you get lucky and have a few inherit this trait. Now, moving up to the second best trait in the game, we have Sima Yi's Prudent, which just straight up lowers all enemy morales by 20 points when he joins the battle as either the commander or the staff officer. There is no counterplay to this, and should you get this trait passed on to generically generated children, you can basically win your battles just by showing up. Finally, last but not least, the novel's favorite and ROTK franchise favorite character, Zhuge Liang, and his Sleeping Dragon trait will take our top spot in the tier list, as when Zhuge Liang joins the battle as a commander or staff officer, tactics for your entire army will get refreshed and reset every time a stratagem is used. So basically, if you're patient enough at the beginning of the battle, or if the battle goes on long enough, you can end up using all your tactics across all your characters twice, thrice, or even 4 to 5 times, as you can have up to 4 stratagem given that you have high intelligence and Zhuge Liang has the highest intelligence in the game. And on top of this, because Zhuge Liang also has the revelation tactic to fill the stratagem gauge whenever he likes, and by the way, this tactic also gets refreshed every time a stratagem is used, so the cycle is essentially almost infinite and only limited by the max number of stratagem available to you, which is 4. And the potential for this trait is just incredible, as you can easily run a continuous Thunderstrike army of just Zhuge Liang and potentially Jiang Wei as his deputy, where all you do is sit at the base, wait for your morale to hit 100, and then Thunderstrike, Revelation, Stratagem, on repeat for about 6 times, as you will also get a free refresh on the 10th day on top of the 5 use that you will get from the Stratagem. And without even having sight of the enemy army, you basically smite your way to victory. And with that, our tier list of the 30 unique traits in the game is complete. Hopefully this tier list has inspired you to try out some of these powerful characters and their traits in your future campaign. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye!